Jai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Mukham karoti vachanam pangam nangate girim yat kripatamaham vande Shri Gurudena taranam Paramanandam Madhavam. Hare Krishna, thank you again for joining. So we were in the fifth canto, third chapter. This is the appearance of Lord Rishabdev. And the earlier part of the chapter was King Nabi had arranged for a yajna to be done for the purpose of having a suitable child. And pleased by the yajna, the Lord personally appears. And the bulk of the chapter is the prayers that are given by the priest to the Lord. And the prayers are very much in the mood of humility, that the priests are feeling ashamed that they've called the Lord for material desires. They're indirectly condemning Maharaj Nabi also, that he had engaged them in fulfilling material desires. And ultimately, they're glorifying the process of bhakti. So they admit that the Lord has appeared not because they had any qualifications or the process that we're doing were anything special, but he appeared because of his mercy. That because the Lord is attracted to his devotee, and somehow or else the priest recognized the fact that there is a sliver of bhakti in them, and the Lord, attracted by that, has come. So the prayers continue from verse 4 to verse 15. Okay, so we are towards we are at verse 12, towards the end of the prayers. So resuming from 5:3:12, so the priests say, "Dear Lord, we may not be able to remember your name, form, and qualities due to stumbling, hunger, falling down, yawning, or being in a miserable diseased condition at the time of death, when there is a high fever. We therefore pray unto you, O Lord, for you are very affectionate to your devotees. Please help us remember you and utter your holy name, attributes, and activities, which can dispel all the reactions of our sinful life." So the priest had been building on this mood of humility, that they have no qualifications to attract the Lord. But that does not stop them from asking for a benediction. In fact, they're using their limitation as a platform to ask for the benediction. Right? So what is the limitation? That they may not able to think about the Nam, Roop, Guna of the Lord, the name, fame, and qualities at the time of death. So what is special at the time of death? Because at that time, the mind is bewildered by skalana. Skalana means by stumbling. Ksut means by hunger. Patan means being weak and falling down. Then Jrambana means yawning, also means shortness of breath. Yawning is a symptom of shortness of breath, and durvasthan, being generally in an undesirable position. So they are saying that not only are we weak as devotees, but at the time of death, because of these circumstances, we will become further weak. Now, why at the time of death? Because, as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, that yam yam vapis paran bhavam, that whatever one thinks of at the time of death, one acquires a body there. So they're particularly concerned about the state of the mind at the time of the death. So they're saying that because you are affectionate to your devotees, you have this special quality that when they cannot think of you, you personally appear in their thoughts, even though you may be uninvited. Right? So earlier on in the chapter, we had seen that the priest had also expressed amazement that the Lord had appeared in the Yagyasthali. So the priest had said that we hadn't invited you to come, but you had come on your own. So similarly, at the time of death, we may not be able to invite you in our thoughts, but the same mercy that you have shown over here by coming uninvited into the Yagyasthala, please show us the same mercy by appearing in our thoughts. According to some scientific analysis, I'm not sure how accurate it is, but according to some scientific analysis, a person on an average thinks 60,000 thoughts in a day. Right? So over a day, while the person is awake, the person thinks about 60,000 thoughts. Out of these 60,000 thoughts, very rarely, even one thought is about one's imminent death. So the point is that if we are practicing our entire life to condition our mind in a certain way, we are definitely not conditioning it to be prepared for death. So we may think about so many things. We may think about how our day is going, how we will talk to a person, or how that person talked to us. So many things we might think about. We may think about Krishna. But very, very rarely does a person reflect on one's imminent death. So by nature, we are not prepared for death. And the priests are admitting it openly, that not only are we not prepared for death, but death comes with its own bewildering set of circumstances. That hunger, shortness of breath, stumbling, which makes it even more difficult to think about the Lord. So they are saying that only by your mercy it would be possible, which is another way of saying that please come uninvited into our thoughts at that time. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada says that in this regard, one may also see Bhagavatam 6.2, 9 to 10 and 14, 15. And these are essentially verses, this appears in the Ajamil pastime, that how Ajamil somehow or else was able to think about Lord Narayan or say Lord Narayan at the time of death. Now, this particular mood that is expressed in this verse, that at the time of death I will not be able to think of you, my Lord. So you take care. You take care of me. It is also expressed in one of the other books, and famously expressed in one of the other books. Can anybody remember which book, which verse?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, is that Upanishad, verse 17 or 18, something like that?
Very nice. It's verse 17 in Upanishad, where the prayer is like it's very poignant and poetic at the same time, right? The prayers that let my body be burned to ashes, let my air be merged into the totality, but my Lord, please remember all my sacrifice, and please remember all that I have done for you, because you are my ultimate beneficiary. And so the prayer is that at the time of death, I will not be able to think about you, but you can take into consideration whatever little I have done for you. And if that pleases you, please appear in my thoughts. Okay. Verse 13. Dear Lord, here is the great King Nabhi, whose ultimate goal in life is to have a son like you. Your Lordship, his position is like that of a person approaching a very rich man and begging for a little grain. Maharaj Nabhi is so desirous of having a son that he is worshipping you for a son. Although you can offer him any exalted position, including elevation to the heavenly planets or liberation back to Godhead. So, in the previous verse, we see that the Brahmanas, they had glorified spiritual endeavor over material aspirations, right? And this verse, it starts with kincha. So kincha means however, and however means that now they're going against the line of reasoning they had previously established. So far they were talking about the superiority of spiritual goals over material aspirations. Now they say, however, this king, he does not get it. He is materialistic. So even though spiritual endeavors are the highest, he still is asking for material benedictions. So Vishnu Chakravarti says that they are saying that the benediction of your audience is the greatest. However, this King Nabhi has asked us to worship you for a son like you. He could have prayed to the Devas for these benedictions, right? Because having a son, even the Devas could give it. So Nabhi could have prayed to the Devas for this, but he's praying to you. So the Lord may say that regardless of what his desires were, when he was praying to me, now that I have personally appeared, I can offer him either elevation to the Swarga or liberation. So the priest, anticipating this, they say that my Lord, you can offer him all of that, heavenly planets or liberation, but this Nabhi is a foolish person. Just like a foolish person goes to a rich person and begs for a little grain, this foolish king, not realizing that you can offer him everything, only desires to get the benediction of a son from you. So we have seen that there are various devotees who have prayed to the Lord for a son. Right? So we see that we see Kardam Muni, right? He prayed to the Lord to have he prayed to get a suitable wife, and then the Lord came and said that I will appear as your son. We have Prishni and Sutapa, and they prayed with a clear understanding of the position of the Lord, that we want you as our son. And then the Lord appeared as their son 3 times. We have Atri and Ansuya who prayed without a clear understanding. Right? And that's why Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, and Lord Vishnu appeared as their sons. And then there is King Nabhi, who understood the position of Krishna, but still wanted a son from him for expanding his lineage. So while the priests are calling him foolish, they're also glorifying him by the fact that they conducted this yajna for him. So the position of the priest is well established now, that they are advanced Vaishnavas. That's why the Lord appeared in response to their prayers. And even though the priests could understand the position of Maharaj Nabhi, they still agreed to be engaged by him in the performance of this yajna. So the principle that is being demonstrated over here is as in the second canto of the Bhagavatam, Akam Sarva Kamo Va Moksha Kamo Dharati Tivrena Bhakti Yogena Yeta Purusham Puram, that even though Nabhi had material desires, but the priest agreed to be engaged by him because he wanted to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he may not be Akam and he may not be Mokshakam, but he was, even with Sarvakamo, he was approaching the Lord. That made him glorious. Like in the Bhagavad Gita, right? Psalm 15, Krishna says that Chaturveda Bhajante Ma, Yejanopiyasati, that 4 kinds of people worship me, even though they are filled with material desires, he still says that they are magnanimous. Why? Because they are approaching Krishna. So the verse is glorifying the potency of bhakti. That even though it may be mixed with material desires, it still stands head and shoulders above any other endeavor. Now, another point to note here is that this apparent criticism of the Brahmins against Nabhi is reflecting the state of his mind at that point of time. Right? It does not reflect his mature realizations. Right? So later on we will see that the Lord appears as his son, Rishabdev. Now, how can a materialist have the Lord as his son? And then even later on, we will see that Nabhi actually returns to Vaikuntha. Only a pure devotee can return to Vaikuntha. Right? So we can understand that this is not the general state of maturity in Nabhi. This is the transient state. At this state, he was married, he wanted a son, he was also devotional. So he kind of dovetailed both of them and said, let's worship the Lord for a son. We see the same thing in Dhruv Maharaj, right? So Dhruv Maharaj is called a materialistic devotee because he wanted a kingdom, but Dhruv Maharaj went back to, he got Dhruvaloka. How can a materialist get Dhruvaloka, which is not different from Vaikuntha? Because by the process, his material desires were purified. So as we will proceed through the canto, we see that the Nabhi that will appear in the next chapter has a higher realization than the Nabhi that has appeared in this chapter. Because in the next chapter, we will see him interacting with his son, Rishabdev. Right? So, and then towards the end of the chapter, we will see that Nabhi has even a higher sense of realization because he renounces his kingdom, gives everything to Rishabdev, and then goes to perform austerity, then return to Vaikuntha. And similarly, in the pastime of Bharat Maharaj, we see that the realizations of Jal Bharat are much higher than the realizations of the dear Bharat. And the realizations of dear Bharat are much higher than that of the Emperor Bharat. In this case, of course, going through different bodies also. But when we characterize that, Bharat, Maharaj Bharat is extremely attached, gave up his devotional life, became attached to a deer, that's at a point of time. But as a deer, we will see that he was very, very renounced. He didn't spend time with other deer. In fact, he always associated with sages. And then as Jat Bharat, he was even more renounced, to the point that he was considered to be mute and mad until he began to speak. Right. So when we consider this kind of criticism, apparent criticism against devotees, we have to also take into account that it is reflecting the state of mind at that particular point of time. So Prabhupada writes that the priests were a little ashamed that King Nabi was performing a great sacrifice just to ask the Lord's benediction for a son, when the Lord could have offered them much more. And then Prabhupada says that the mood of an intelligent devotee is Mam Janmani Janmanishware Bhavatat Bhakti Rahituki. Right. So this is in the Shishtastakam prayer. So he says Mahaprabhu would not have said Mam Janmani Janmani if it does not matter to a devotee if he takes birth after birth. The Prabhupada makes this point to say that a devotee does not even desire liberation. That's when he says that Mam Janmani Janmanishwari Bhaktat Bhakti Ahituki Toai. The prayer is that life after life after life, I have your causeless devotion. So the fact that the person is acknowledging I have multiple lives, which means he will die and take birth again, which means he will not be liberated, which makes that devotee does not really care about liberation, but ultimately cares only about bhakti. Now, in this context, one may wonder from a more practical aspect about devotees asking the Lord for material benedictions. So the general conception that we are given is that don't go to Krishna for material things, right? As we go through life, especially as practicing devotees, then we do get into material problems. So what does one do at the time? What does one? So one simply does not go to the Lord, but only prays for spiritual advancement, or one goes to the Lord for material benedictions. So the analogy that can help us understand the scenario is that a devotee is going to the temple, and while he's going to the temple, he gets a thorn in his foot. So when he gets a thorn in his foot, then out of pain, he cries out, "Oh Krishna!" And then Krishna appears. So you called me? Do you want a benediction? The devotee says, "Yes, please remove this thorn from my foot." Now, this may look like a ask for a silly benediction, that the Lord of everything has appeared, and the devotee is asking to have the thorn removed. But now, if you step back and look into a broader context, why is the devotee saying that the thorn should be removed? So that he can go to the temple and continue with his service. So one can ask for material benedictions if they support the spiritual endeavor. Right? So when the crocodile had caught the foot of Gajendra, then he recites this Gajendra Stuti, and in the mature state of realization, when the Lord is appearing, he's still saying that, "Can you remove this crocodile from my foot?" But at the same time, he's saying whether you remove it or not, it's fine. It's okay. But if you can, please remove this crocodile that's attached to my foot. So similarly, devotees may ask for material benediction so that they can pursue their spiritual practices. The difference is in the mood. That somebody else may ask for material benediction to enjoy materially. And one may ask for material benediction to become stronger in their bhakti. And the second important aspect is that when a materialist asks for a benediction and the Lord does not fulfill it, then he loses faith on the Lord. He will say, I asked you for this, you couldn't give me this, let me move on to somebody else. Or he may criticize the Lord, that I'm very disappointed. Maybe I'll give you another opportunity. I'll ask you for something else. Let's see, you can do it. For a devotee, it does not matter. If the Lord fulfills it, then the devotee acknowledges the magnanimity of the Lord. If the Lord does not fulfill it, then it does not affect his faith. It does not affect his worship. He continues with the worship in exactly the same way. He understands that the reason the Lord didn't give me is because it would not be beneficial to my devotional practice. Right? So there is some level of gratitude over there, and he continues. So this verse, Akama Sarvakamovi, that the reason why even going to the Lord full of material desires is glorified, as we see in the case of Gajendra, we see in the case of Dhruva, we see in the case of Maharaj Nabi, is because one would eventually develop these realizations that how can I use this benedictions in the service of the Lord? And we see that Nabi will also get glorified because even though he is asking for a son, but ultimately he wants the lineage to be established for the benefit of the praja. Right? Because the most benefit that a king gives is to the kingdom that he rules. So even though he is asking for a son, but there is that sense of service to others, which will make him glorious. Okay, moving on to verse 14. Dear Lord, unless one worships the lotus feet of great devotees, one will be conquered by the illusory energy, and his intelligence will be bewildered. Indeed, who has not been carried away by the waves of material enjoyment, which are like poison? Your illusory energy is unconquerable. No one can see the path of this material energy or tell how it is working. So in the previous verse, the Brahmanas had criticized King Nabi that he is approaching the Lord for material benedictions. Even though he is aware of the spiritual potency, he is still seeking material benefit. So the Lord might ask, why is he doing that? So the priest answered, saying that this is because he has not sufficiently served the devotees and received their mercy. So they say that the illusory energy of the Lord is very powerful. Right? It can carry, even though it's like poison, but it can carry away the person. They say your energy is unconquerable. And it is bewildering. Nobody can see the path. But what is the redeeming factor? They say, unless one worships the lotus feet of the great devotees. So, the fault in King Nabi is that he has not sufficiently worshipped the lotus feet. Now, there he has worshipped the lotus feet of the devotees, specifically the priest present, which is enabling him to have the direct audience of the Lord and subsequently have the Lord as his son, but not sufficiently worship. He needs to worship more before he becomes completely divested of his material desires. Srila Prabhupada says that everyone is subjected to the influence of Maya. Freedom from Maya's influence is possible when one engages in the service of great devotees. Mahacharana Seva. Without worshipping the lotus feet of great devotee, one cannot be free from Maya's influence. Srila Narottam Das Thakur therefore says, Chhadiya Vaishnav Seva Nistar Payecha Keva. Who has been freed from Maya's clutches without serving the lotus feet of a Vaishnava? Maya is aparajita. That means she is unconquerable. And Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Devi Ayesha Gunmai, that very, very Mammaya Duratya, very, very difficult to overcome unless one takes shelter of the Lord. Okay, moving on to verse 15. O Lord, you perform many wonderful activities. Our only aim was to acquire a son by performing this great sacrifice. Therefore, our intelligence is not very sharp. We are not experienced in ascertaining life's goal. By inviting you to this negligible sacrifice for some material motive, you certainly committed a great offense at your lotus feet. Therefore, O Lord of Lords, please excuse our offense because of your causeless mercy and equal mind. So this is the concluding verse of the prayer, and it's also a summary of what the Brahmanas wanted to convey. So they still want the Lord to benedict King Nabi with a suitable son, right? So they say our aim was to acquire a son. They're also acknowledging their contamination. So they're begging for forgiveness, acknowledging the fact that they are not sufficiently spiritually advanced. And what is the prayer? That even though we have no redeeming qualifications, we are materialists, we are fallen, but they're saying, the Lord, you can forgive us because you are magnanimous. Not because we have any redeeming qualities, but because you are most merciful. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada quotes 716, same Chaturvija Bhajante Man, and he explains that why the Lord benedicts such persons who appear before him with material desires. Why does the Lord benedict them? So Prabhupada says that initiation into bhakti begins when one is in a distressed condition or in want of money or is inquisitive to understand the absolute truth. And so this is the Artho Artharthi Jigyasu. Nonetheless, people who approach the Supreme Lord in this way are not actually devotees. They are Sukritana. They are pious because they are approaching the Lord. And Prabhupada says that they unnecessarily disturb the Lord for material gains. However, the Lord is so kind, even though disturbed, he fulfills the desires of his beggars. The pure devotee is anabhilashita shunya. He has no motive behind his worship. He is not conducted by the influence of Maya in the form of karma or jnana. The pure devotee is always prepared to execute the order of the Lord without personal consideration. The Ritvija, the priest at the sacrifice, knew very well the distinction between karma and bhakti. And because they considered themselves under the influence of karma, fruitive activities, they begged the Lord's pardon. They knew that the Lord had been invited to come for some paltry reasons. Okay, so moving, so that ends the prayer by the Brahmanas. So we move on to the 16th verse. Sri Sukadev Goswami said, the priests who were even worshipped by King Nabi, the emperor of the Bharatvarsha, offered prayers in prose. Generally, they were in poetry and bowed down to the Lord's lotus feet. The Lord of Lords, the ruler of the demigods, was very pleased with them, and he began to speak as follows. So why was the Lord pleased with them? One is that they had approached the Lord after devotional service. Second was their humility. And third was the fact that they were sincere, they were transparent. So one of the qualities that the Lord appears is this sincerity. So they were not pretending to be something that they were not. So it says over here that Lord Vishnu was very pleased with them. So from 16 to 20, which is the end of the chapter, we'll see the benedictions that the Lord will give to King Nabi. So verse 17, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, O great sages, I am certainly very pleased with your prayers. You are all truthful. You have prayed for the benediction of a son like me for King Nabi. But this is very difficult to obtain. Since I am the Supreme Person without a second, and since no one is equal to me, another personality like me is not possible to find. In any case, because you are all qualified Brahmanas, your vibrations should not prove untrue. I consider the Brahmanas who are well qualified with Brahmanical qualities to be as good as my mouth. We see the similar mood of adoration to the Brahmanas. Or does anybody recollect? There's another pastime in which the Lord displays a very similar mood of showing his very strong love and respect to the Brahmanas.
For Kumaras?
Very good. So we see in the four Kumaras, when the Lord is pacifying the four Kumaras in the cursing of Jai Vijay, the Lord makes so many statements. He said the Brahmanas are the highest, they are the most beloved personality. I would cut off my right arm to protect them. Right. So here he's saying that they're as good as my mouth. So from the mouth, one speaks and one eats. So that's why it is said that feeding the Brahmana is as good as feeding the Lord, because the Brahmanas represent the mouth of the Lord. And the words spoken by the Brahmanas are as good as the words spoken by the Lord, which is why the Lord goes out of his way, because his own words never come untrue. So when the Brahmanas who represent his mouth speak, the Lord goes out of his way to uphold them. So even though the Brahmanas had expressed their materialistic inclination, the Lord is already has given them the highest benediction of his personal association. Right? So they are able to see the Lord face to face. Right? So and the Lord is giving the reasons for it. He says, because you are all truthful, I am very much pleased by your prayers. So the Brahmanas were truthful in showing that they had mixed devotion. Right? And Krishna appreciates that. And the Lord appreciated the fact that the Brahmanas went to him and no one else. So when we see this situation, we can understand that the endeavor by a devotee is always complemented by the mercy of the Lord. The Brahmanas were not qualified because of their material contamination. But they had but they had humility and they had sincerity. So the Lord comes and fulfills everything that they lack. So in our lives, we rely on this. As long as we are humble and truthful, sincerely following what we are asked to do, then it's not by our own effort, but by the mercy of the Lord that we will make purification, or we will get purified and ultimately go back to Godhead. So Prabhupada writes that in this word, Kevalyat means that the Lord has no competitor. There is only one God. In the Shvetashtar Upanishad 6.8, it is said, Natat samas chadyakas chadrishyate. No one is found to be equal to him or greater than him. That is the definition of God. So that is why the Lord is saying, you want a son like me? There is no one that is equal to me or greater to me. So what is the solution? That the Lord will give in the next verse. He says that, since I cannot find anyone equal to me, I shall personally expand myself into a plenary portion, and thus advent myself in the womb of Meru Devi, the wife of Maharaj Nabhi, the son of Agnidhar. Prabhupada writes that this is an example of the omnipotence of the personality of Godhead, that although he is without a second, he can expand himself by Swamsha and sometimes by Vivinamsha. Right? So Vivinamsha is Shakti Vaishakta, when a jiva is empowered by the Lord's potency, and Swamsha is when the Lord personally expands. So Lord Vishnu herein agrees to send his personal expansion as the son of Meru Devi, the wife of Maharaj Nabhi, who is the son of Agnidhar. The Ritvija, the priest, knew that God is one. Yet they prayed for the Supreme Lord to become the son of Maharaj Nabhi, to let the world know that the absolute truth, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is one without a second. So, important philosophical point Prabhupada is making, that sometimes there is criticism that is levied against the Vedic conception that it is what is called as a polytheistic religion, which means that people believe in many gods, and they quote 330 million demigods and principal gods, and then further expansions, and they say that in the Hindu culture everybody is a god, right? So they extend that. So the Vedic culture is monotheistic but polymorphic, right? Polymorphic means many forms, one god, many forms, different from polytheistic, which is many gods. So if one says that it is difficult to understand how the Lord can take so many forms, then one is limiting the Lord to one's own conception. Just because you and I cannot take multiple forms, you and I cannot be in many places at the same time. And if we project that same conception on the Lord, then we're bringing the Lord down to our level, right? So the understanding is, and this of course we know is also yogis who are powerful enough can do that. So why not the Lord? Lord is the supreme yogi. Okay, next verse. Sukdev Goswami continued. After saying this, the Lord disappeared. The wife of King Nabhi, Queen Meru Devi, was sitting by the side of her husband, and consequently she could hear everything the Supreme Lord had spoken. So Prabhupada writes, according to the Vedic injunctions, one should perform sacrifices in the company of one's own wife. Saptaniko dharmam acharit. Religious ritual should be performed with one's wife. So we saw the same thing in the pastime of Prithu Maharaj, that the ask for him by Lord Brahma and Swayambhavu Manu was to rule the kingdom. But as part of that, he entered Grihastha Ashram. Because as part of ruling the kingdom, he is also obliged to perform many yagyas for the benefit of the kingdom and to set an example. And it's difficult to, you cannot perform the rituals without having the wife sit by you. The husband should be sitting on the right of the wife. We see in Ramayana, when Lord Ram had banished Sita Devi, then the priest had said that you have to marry again. Otherwise, this was Treta Yuga. Treta Yuga was the age of Yagya. So otherwise, you cannot perform Yagya. And so Lord Ram refused to marry. He said, I've taken a vow. I cannot marry. I'll marry only once. So then, of course, in the Vedas, there is also a workaround. So every time that Lord Ram performed a Yagya, then a golden image of Sita Devi was made. And that the golden statue would sit next to Lord Ram in the performance of the Yagya. So in this way, he performed hundreds and thousands of Yagyas, and hundreds and thousands of those with the golden replicas of Sita Devi were made. And in the Garg Samhita, it is noted that when Lord Ram was returning to Vaikuntha, then these golden replicas of Sita Devi came to life and said that we are your wives. We have sat next to you in the performance of this Vedic Yagyas. So you have to give us the position of your wife. And Lord Ram said, cannot do it because of my vow. But when I come as Krishna, you will come as gopis. So in the Garg Samhita, there is a section that talks about the origin of the various gopis. And one part of the gopis are essentially these golden replicas of Sita Devi. Okay, so now moving to the last verse. O Vishnu Dutt, Parishit Maharaj, the Supreme Personality of Godhead was pleased by the great sages at that sacrifice. Consequently, the Lord decided to personally exhibit the method of executing religious principles as observed by brahmacharis, sannyasis, vanaprasthas, and grihasthas engaged in rituals, and also satisfied Maharaj Nabi's desire. Consequently, he appeared as the son of Meru Devi in his original spiritual form, which is above the modes of material nature. So Sukdev Goswami is clarifying over here that when the Lord appears, he always appears in his spiritual form. He never appears. He may appear to have a material body, which may appear to have changes that are material, which is taking birth, growing up, producing byproducts, diminishing. But nevertheless, one should not mistake it. And why does the Lord appear in this material form? Two reasons are given over here. A so-called material form, two reasons are given here. One is because he was pleased by Maharaj Nabi's devotion. And the second is that he also wanted to show the proper execution of the religious principles, specifically sannyas. But we will see that Rishabdev was also the perfect king, the perfect husband, the perfect everything. Right? So in order to show how one can have perfection. So Prabhupada said that Vishwanath Chakravarti states that the word Shukla means consisting of Shuddha Sattva. So Lord Vishnu descends in his Shuddha Sattva form. Shuddha Sattva refers to the Sattva Guna, which is never contaminated. Later he says the son of Maharaj Nabi Rishabdev appeared on this earth to preach the principles of religion. This will be explained in the 5th chapter of the 5th canto. So Vishwanath Chakravarti, he he kind of unfolds this verse as a conversation, right? So he says that the Lord says that that I will appear to teach Vat Rasananam. So Vat Rasananam is translated as the naked austerity of those who are almost naked, almost without any clothes. In other words, he desired to show the principle of naked mendicance or extreme renunciation. Right. So we saw that the Lord said two reasons. One was because he was pleased with Nabi, and the second was Vat Rasnana, which is extreme renunciation. So Vishnu Chakravartipad says that one might say that, my Lord, you have come to show this naked renunciation, but children are also naked. Mad people are also moving around naked. So the Lord says, no. What I will show is the religions of those who perform austerities, dharma. So then one might say, but the atheists also perform austerities. So the Lord, he says that they are the sages who are acting in knowledge and do not fall from celibacy. Right. So the reason that the Lord is adding these qualifications is to indicate that he will be preaching to those who practice austerity for the sake of devotion, not practice austerities out of madness, out of immaturity, or out of atheism. Right. So Vishnu Chakravarti is giving a glimpse into what we will see happens later on. Prabhupada says, Maharaj Nabi, the son of Maharaj Nabi, Rishabdev, appeared on the earth to teach the principles of religion. Right. So that's the concluding principle of the appearance of the Lord. So with this, we end the third chapter of the 5th canto, and I'll pause here and see if you have any comments or discussions.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, just a comment. When you were saying about praying, somebody prayed to get like a son. I was thinking of Bhakti Vinod Thakur also. He prayed to get Bhakti Siddhanta, the ray of Vishnu, so that he can help him to, to continue the mission of Lord Chaitanya.
Very good point. Very good point. Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. One thing that you mentioned about King Nabi is consciousness is not fully purified at that moment because still he was anchoring for some material benediction from the Lord. And so in the next chapter, you're saying that he has a different level of consciousness. And so I also heard that, even we see the other way around also. People perform really sincere devotional service, the devotees whom we know, and then they fall out, and then they come back, or they quit and go. So I heard this from another devotee saying that how to understand this, whether when they were doing the devotional service, were they sincerely doing it? If they were sincerely doing it, why would they fall out? So that was my a question for that. That devotee answered that at that moment they had the sincerity of doing the devotional service to the Lord. So that's how we should take it. So that's what the answer I got. So does it? That's what. Does it make sense or?
It does. It does. I guess there are a couple of aspects. As one point is that is undoubtedly that they were making advancement because at that time they were displaying sincerity, and that's why they were making advancement. Why did they stop making advancement? There could be several reasons for it, right? They could have offended Vaishnavas. They could have become more attached to material things. So there could be different reasons there. But even as we spend a day in our life, we see this strengthening and weakening of our own sincerity. At some points we are more sincere. Some days we are more sincere. We chant better rounds. Some days we are lesser. Lesser sincere. And Rupa Goswami simply analyzes this in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and says this is because of the presence of anarthas. So as long as that anartha is present, bhakti will be asthir. It will wax and wane. When the anarthas become nivrit, then the nishtha appears. Then that strengthening happens.
There's something else also I was thinking too while you were speaking about sometime the Lord does not fulfill our desire. Although we might be asking for something, but he may not fulfill our desire. And one video clip of Maharaj, I think it was very old clip actually, fairly old clip. Maharaj was very young looking in that one. He was telling, somebody was asking, sometime we pray and then there is no answer. Sometime we get an opposite response. Sometime we get a response. How to take it? Then Maharaj said, the only way is whether the Lord answers or doesn't answer, our attraction to Lord should not waver. So our relationship to the Lord should strengthen more and more, should increase more and more. So that is the real bhakti. So he was telling those things. I was remembering that when you told that. So I was just sharing that. That's all. Nothing, not a question, but sharing.
Thank you.
I don't know whether you remember the video clip.
I don't remember that video, but yes, this is a point Maharaj makes often. And it's best reflected in the praise by Lord Brahma, especially 10:14, 7:30 Anukampam Sumekshama, one who tolerates all miseries that are happening. So when the miseries are happening, you can understand these are situations where the person said, Lord, please protect me. And the Lord said, maybe not, maybe later on. But the person keeps tolerating. And then what is the result of it? That it becomes his birthright to get the mercy of the Lord. So this also I've heard that the devotees were able to tolerate both when the Lord gives and the Lord does not give. The Lord becomes very pleased by them.
And one last thing, Prabhu, about the passing away of when a person passes away, he becomes choked. He's you were telling a lot of difficulties, and so it's very difficult to remember the Lord. I think the beginning of the class you were mentioning about that. I was remembering Kadamakanana Maharaj is passing away recently, how much difficulty was going through. And I was listening. I hope you all probably watched the same video, that how he left the body right after the Arati to Giriraj. Giriraj is deity. Right after the Arati, he left the body. So it was glorious event. So I was just remembering that.
Yeah. Even if the body doesn't cooperate, the Lord makes arrangements for the body to cooperate. Srila Prabhupada is a classic example that till the very last day of his passing away, he was giving purports. He was dictating purports on the Bhagavatam, right? He was translating the 13th chapter of the 10th canto, and he was giving purports. And if you read those purports, very difficult. Like personally, I can tell you that if I'm fasting for Ekadashi, then towards the end of the day, it becomes very difficult for me. I mean, forget about writing, even reading and understanding. Just because, even though it's not that you're really deprived of food, right? You ate a lot the day before and the day after, but to some extent, it's a state of mind. It becomes difficult to concentrate there. And by that time, Prabhupada had not eaten for like a month or so, 40 days or so. He hadn't eaten anything. But his purports are crystal sharp. He's quoting other verses, etc. there. So that's the benediction of the Lord, that he allows one to regain all that can be used in service.
When we see such passing away, that gives us the confidence to further proceed in this path. It's a very wonderful inspiration, actually.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Thank you for sharing, Prabhu. So let me do a quick summary of 5.3 and then we'll move on to the next chapter. So the third chapter talked about the appearance of Rishabdev, and essentially it's divided into 3 sections. The first section is talking about the appearance of the Lord, and that is a brief description of the form of the Lord. And then after that, 12 verses from 4 to 15 are prayers offered by the priests. And I think one of the unique things on this prayers, and I think that's the reason it's noted at more than one place, is that the prayers are typically typically offered in meter, but here it is offered in prose, which means that they are just spoken, they are not sung. But we see these beautiful prayers that are offered by the priests. And then in the last 5 verses is the Lord responding to these, which concludes with the Lord assuring the priest and the king that he would personally appear as the son of King Nabi, because he is pleased with King Nabi and because he wants to preach the path of renunciation in bhakti. And so that's how the chapter ends. Okay, so moving on to the 4th chapter. The title of the 4th chapter is Characteristics of Rishabdev, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This chapter is also a short chapter. It has 19 verses and divided into 3 sections. The first set of sections talk about the qualities of Lord Rishabdev. Then the second section, which is 4 to 7, talks about Nabi's Vatsalya Rasa and perfection. Right. So here we see Nabi 2 and Nabi 3. So we see Nabi 2 as the father who is devoted to the son, who happens to be the personality of Godhead, and we see Nabi 3 who renounces everything to perform devotional service and go back to Godhead. And then the last 12 verses 8 to 19 describe the exemplary characteristics of Rishabdev and also his lineage, his sons. Okay, so this chapter is also mostly in prose. So we will not read the Sanskrit, but do the translation. So 541. Sri Sukadeva Goswami said, as soon as the Lord was born as the son of Maharaj Nabi, he manifested symptoms of the Supreme Lord, such as marks on the bottom of his feet, the flag, thunderbolt, etc. This son was equal to everyone and very peaceful. He could control his senses and his mind, and possessing all opulence, he did not hanker for material enjoyment. Endowed with all these attributes, the son of Maharaj Nabi became more powerful day after day. Due to this, the citizens, learned brahmanas, demigods, and ministers wanted Rishabdev to be appointed ruler of the earth. So this verse essentially is a synopsis of Maharaj Rishabdev from birth to youth. Right? So there is not much elaborate description given of the youthful or the childhood pastimes of Maharaj Rishabdev or his growing up. So we see that the verse talks about his appearance and concludes with the fact that now he is ready to rule the kingdom. Now, at the time of birth, he exhibited all the manifested symptoms of the Supreme God. Right? These are the lakshanas that appear in the body of, that are unique to the Lord. The Prabhupada says that that an incarnation of God has to be accepted by experienced people and by the symptoms described in the Shastras. Like we see the same thing in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that when he appeared, then Nilambar Chakravarti was he was a famous and a qualified Brahmana. And then he looked at the symptoms, the physiognomy of the child, of the markings on the hand and the feet, and the shape of the head, the shape of the eyes, right? So there are 32 lakshanas that establish a person being a Mahapurush, and Baby Nimai had all 32 of them. So similarly, we see that Maharaj Rishabdev, he had all the symptoms of the personality of the Godhead. Right? So the verse describes 5 qualities. Bhagavad Lakshanam, that he possessed the symptoms of the personality of Godhead. He was Samya, which is equal to everyone. Then he was Upashama, that he was completely peaceful. He was in control of the senses and the mind. And then Vairagya, he was renounced, and Aishwarya, he had all opulences. Another point that is made also is that the Lord's incarnations are predicted in the scriptures. So when somebody says that I am the personality of Godhead, then one needs to show where in the scripture is your incarnation predicted. Right? So Prabhupada says some of the things that can be used to differentiate between real gods and fake gods is these. That do they have the bodily symptoms? Are they Samya, Upashama, Vairagya, Aishwarya? Do the scriptures predict their appearance? Can they manifest the universal form like Mahaprabhu did or Krishna did? Unless one is able to do all that, one should not be accepted as the personality of Godhead. In verse 2. So this chapter has very straightforward purports, right? So they're mostly, the chapter is a narrative actually. So in the previous chapter we had a prayer that had some nuances that helped us dive deeper into it. This chapter is mostly a narrative. So we'll see Prabhupada has very short purports that simply expand on the verse. So the second verse, when the son of Maharaj Nabi became visible, he evinced all good qualities described by the great poets, namely a well-built body with all the symptoms of the Godhead: prowess, strength, beauty, name, fame, influence, and enthusiasm. When the father Maharaj Nabi saw all these qualities, he thought that his son to be the best among human beings, or the supreme being. Therefore, he gave him the name Rishabha. So the literal meaning of Rishabha is the best amongst humans. So seeing this verse essentially expands on the previous verse. that the son of Nabi, he had the physical attributes like a well-built body, and then he had the Shad Aishwarya of power, strength, beauty, name, fame, influence, and renunciation. Right. So when Maharaj Nabi saw all this, now one might wonder that Maharaj Nabi already knew that his son would be the personality of Godhead, but these strengthened his faith. Right. So he named his son Rishabh, which indicates that he was the supreme living being. Verse 3. Indra, the king of heaven, who is very materially opulent, became envious of King Rishabdev. Consequently, he stopped pouring water on the planet known as Bharatvarsha. At that time, the Supreme Lord Rishabdev, the master of all mystic power, understood King Indra's purpose and smiled a little. Then, by his own prowess, through Yogamaya, his internal potency, he profusely poured water upon his own place, which was known as Ajanava. So if you look in the verse, then the word Bhagwan is applied to both Indra and Rishabdev. And Prabhupada explains that Bhagwan means that one who is full of opulences. Like Van is a carrier and Bhag means literally it means good fate, but contextually it means one who is full of opulences. So the Lord is full of the opulences, and those who have received the mercy of the Lord are also full of opulence. In the previous chapter, we saw that Narad Muni was addressed as Bhagwan. Other places we see Lord Brahma, Lord Shiv being addressed as Bhagwan. So one should not get confused by this appellation, by this title, right? Because there may be many Bhagwans, but there is only one Supreme Lord who is the source of all this Bhagwan. So there is one Bhagwan who makes them all Bhagyavan. And Bhagyavan is one who receives the opulences. So there is only one who gives them these opulences. Right? Nityo Nityanam Cheto Chetanam Eko Bhavanam Yo. So there is only one who is Vidhati Kame, that he is fulfilling their desires since time immemorial. And Prabhupada makes this point so that we don't get confused by commentators who use these verses to indicate that Indra and Rishabdev are at the same level because they are being addressed in the same way. Or Lord Shiva and Lord Vishnu or Lord Brahma and Lord Vishnu are at the same level. Right? In fact, in the Puranas, you will see that even respected personalities are called Bhagwan, human personalities. Like if somebody is going to address somebody who is elder or more educated or more renounced, they will address them as Bhagwan, simply as an acknowledgement of the fact that they are more replete in opulences. Now, the second point made over here is that Indra became envious of King Rishabdev because Indra is famous for his own opulences. And when he saw that Rishabdev had these opulences, he became envious and he stopped giving rain. Now, in the third chapter, it is explained that the rain comes to the process of yajna. So, Indra was obliged to give rain, but out of envy, he stopped the falling of rain. But then Lord Rishabdev, he caused the rain to fall, which means that ultimately it is the Lord who causes the rain to fall. if Indra was the only one who could cause the rain to fall, then Maharaj Rishabdev would have to go and speak to Indra. Either chastise him or entreat of him. But factually speaking, Indra derives this ability to give rain from the Lord. So because Indra was not giving, Lord said, okay, no worries. I will give the rain. So in the Vraj Leela, we see that Indra, out of envy to Krishna, had excessive rains falling. And then the Lord lifted the Govardhan to stop the effect of that rain. So whether Indra is giving rain or whether he is not giving rain, the Lord is independent. He can do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada generally does that. Whenever he sees there is a focus on yajna, he will get the focus on Sankirtan yajna. Right? So he says that in the current day and age, that the Bhagavatam advises yajna Sankirtana praya yajanti hi sumedasha. That those who are intelligent in this current age of Kali will perform Sankirtan yajna. And he says, in this way, there will be no disturbance or scarcity of rain. Prabhupada actually at different places, he predicts that. Here also he says that in the age of Kali, there will be a great scarcity of rain. Right? Anavrishti. And in order to be protected from it, one needs to perform yajna. And in this age of Kali, Sankirtan yajna. So generally, there are three kinds of consciousness of people who relate to the Lord. So there are those who consider themselves to be the servant of the Lord. So they are pure devotees. There are those who consider themselves as servant of the self. They are fully conditioned. And there are those who have both these characteristics, that they are servant of the Lord as well as servant of the self. And these personalities become demigods, which is why we see this strange behavior. So Indra is definitely a servant of the Lord. But along with that, he also has the desire to serve himself. So he displays this seemingly bewildering behavior. Another point that is noted is that this land was known as Ajnaba. So Ajnaba, because the previous king was King Nabhi. So after him, it was named Ajnaba. And later on, it will be named after the son of Rishabdev, Bharat Maharaj. It will be known as Bharatvarsha. Then we also see that when Indra withheld the rain, Rishabdev did not chastise him. Actually, we see that Rishabdev smiled a little bit. Why did he smile? Because this is the mood of an indulgent father towards a rebellious son. Like sometimes the father is asking the son to do something and the son says, no, I will not do it. Right? And then he will clench his fingers and sit down and say, absolutely not. Right? And the father will smile and then try and convince the son to do it. So it establishes the position of Rishabdev with respect to Indra. The Indra is doing all this, and Maharaj Rishabdev is saying, okay, that's no worries. He's just being a truant. Indra has this thing that goes on. He gets bewildered very quickly, but don't worry. And how does he produce the rain? It says that Yogamaya. So by his internal potency, he produces the rain. Not if he was to be produced by the external potency, then he would have to go to Indra, because that's how Indra produces rain. But the Lord, through his internal potency, he produces rain, so he's referred as Yogeshwara. Right? So we see the interaction between Yogamaya and Mahamaya. That Indra, who was deploying Mahamaya to stop the rain, and the Lord is deploying Yogamaya to produce the rain. And the victory is always Yogamaya. Okay, so I'm actually going to stop. No, I'll do one more verse. And after that, I'll stop for any discussions. So we'll do verse 4. Due to getting a perfect son, according to his desire, King Nabi was always overwhelmed with transcendental bliss and was very affectionate to his son. It was with ecstasy and a faltering voice that he addressed him, "My dear son, my darling." This mentality was brought about by Yogamaya, whereby he accepted the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Father, as his own son. Out of his supreme goodwill, the Lord became his son and dealt with everyone as if he were an ordinary human being. Thus King Nabi began to raise his transcendental son with great affection, and he was overwhelmed with transcendental bliss, joy, and devotion. So from verses 4 till 7, we see Nabi 2, which is Nabi's Vatsalya Rasa. Right? So he had strong affection for his son. And it so happened that his son was a personality of Godhead. So that purified him to the stage of coming to pure devotion. Right? And the verse also, it explains the general dynamics of how the Lord and his devotees, his advanced devotees, deal with one another. Right? So in the previous chapter, we saw that Nabi had received the benediction from Lord Vishnu that he would appear as his son. Right? So he was very much aware that Rishabdev was a personality of Godhead. But it's not that he looked at him and he said, okay, let me put him on an altar and do Mangalarti and constantly worship him. We see that he treats him like a affectionate father. And why is that possible? So Sukdev Goswami says, Maya Vilasita Matir. So Matir means mind and Vilasat means bewildered. And Maya here is Yogamaya. That by the influence of Yogamaya, his mentality was bewildered. So both the Yogamaya and the Mahamaya have the same effect of forcing the jiva to forget the divinity of the Lord. The only difference is that when under the influence of Yogamaya, the person forgets the divinity, he actually comes closer to Krishna. As we see in the case of Maharaj Nabi, or we see in the case of the residents of Vrindavan. And when one forgets Krishna under the influence of Mahamaya, then one is taken away from Krishna. So this is the essential difference between Mahamaya and Yogamaya. So both of them bewildered, that's the nature of Maya. But yoga means to connect. Yogamaya connects to Krishna, Mahamaya takes away from Krishna. The Prabhupada says the word Maya is used in the sense of illusion. Considering the Supreme Personality of Godhead to be his own son, Maharaj Nabi was certainly an illusion. But this was transcendental illusion. This illusion is required. Otherwise, how can one accept the Supreme Father as his own son? The Supreme Lord appears as the son of one of his devotees, just as Lord Krishna appeared as the son of Yashoda and Nand Maharaj. These devotees could never think of the son as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, for such appreciation would hamper the relationship and parental love. Okay, So I'll stop over here, see if there's any discussion.
Prabhu, we've seen that there are always Indra that come and do many things, stopping Yagna, and even in Krishna Lila, there's a lot of things. Is it the same Indra or in different? I know in different, Yuga there are different Indra, most probably.
This Indra is definitely different because he's appearing in the first day of Brahma. So this is not the Indra that we have here. So this was one of the points that was made in a lecture, that sometimes people say that Indra has so many bad qualities. He does this. He was messing around with Prithu Maharaj and all that. But the fact is that they're all different Indras, or they could be different Indras, not necessarily, but they could be different Indras. It's not that one Indra is doing all that. So different people take their position, but they have a similar nature, so they tend to do similar. They have similar temporary fall downs. Basically, they're all devotees.
Yeah, they make the pastime more interesting in a way.
Yeah, you can see they do that service also to the Lord. They create those ripples, and when things go south, then they glorify the Lord by taking shelter of Him. So they definitely create a lot of different rasas, valor and chivalry, and the pastime of the Lords.
Thank you, Lord.
Thank you. Okay. So if there are no more questions, comments, we'll stop here. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Anant Koti Vaishnavinda ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Jai Gaur Premanand. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.